In this video, I'm going to talk all about building naming rights agreements and sponsorship. Check it out. Let's talk about how to create a building naming rights agreement. But before we do, I want to say that the first thing you should do is engage a lawyer who has expertise in this area. This video is entirely for your own educational purposes, and you should not use this to create a legally binding agreement with your sponsor. Feel free to send this to your legal team or to your lawyer so that you can let them know some of the things that you think should be included. But I do not recommend that you create a legal document unless you're a lawyer and you have expertise in this area. The reason I say this is because naming rights are very complicated. There's lots of room for things to go wrong, lots of opportunity for the sponsor and the property to not be on the same page. It's not worth the risk. Whenever you're making a legal document or a legally binding contract, you should absolutely consult a lawyer. I always do. I never enter into a sponsorship agreement that isn't written by or at least reviewed by my legal team. However, there's some areas that you should really consider when you're thinking of selling naming right sponsorship for your physical space or your buildings. So what is a building naming rights agreement? Well, it's really easy to define. It is the naming of a building after a sponsor. So sponsor X comes along and says, we will give you X dollars if you call this building the Sponsor X building. Want an example of this? Simply look up pretty much any arena where professional football, soccer, hockey, or basketball play. And you will see that virtually every one of their arenas, if not every single arena, is named after a sponsor. But it's not just sports that might consider engaging in naming rights. And so whether you're in sport or you're in education or perhaps your municipality, you might be considering a naming right agreement. And this video might be helpful to you. So what goes into a building naming rights agreement? Lots and lots of stuff, way more than we're going to cover in this video. That's why you're going to work with your lawyer or your legal team to come up with the correct document for you. But I want to highlight some things that I have in the past included in our agreements when we have sold naming rights sponsorship. First, I want to get really clear about what I mean by naming rights. What will it actually look like? Where will the signage appear? How exactly are we required to say the name of the building? What sort of abbreviations would be considered acceptable and okay? Does it include broadcast rights? And if so, what does that look like and what does that mean? What exclusivity should we include? This all comes under the type of naming rights being offered. You want to be crystal clear with your sponsor what you're offering and what they expect. And the best way to do that, of course, is to get everything in writing for your lawyers and their lawyers to review to make sure that everyone has the same expectation. You should also include duration of the naming rights deal. How long will it be part of the naming of the building? How long will you commit to this? How long are they expecting? Will you have opt-out periods? Are there any things that might trigger a renegotiation of this contract or the naming right? From a legal perspective, I certainly can't comment on, but from a valuation perspective and a sponsorship best practice perspective, I'm not comfortable with perpetual naming rights. I think it does not serve the rights holder or the property well. You still may choose to do it, and there are plenty of examples of buildings offering perpetual naming rights, but in the vast majority of cases, you are going to want to limit it to some term, whether that's 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, or whatever you and your sponsor agree on. I would be very unlikely to agree to a physical naming right of less than 3 years, but every scenario is different and you may feel differently. Generally speaking, 3 to 5 years is within my comfort zone. 10 years is fantastic. Beyond that, I as the property, as the rights holder, would actually prefer the opportunity to look for another naming right sponsor. You should also consider how the name will be changed and how name change approval occurs. What if the company rebrands and changes their name? What if they change their industry or offer a new product line that might not be in line with your particular goals, ethics, brand, the legality around what products can be advertised to whom, etc. So how will the name actually be changed? Where will it be changed? When will it be changed? And if something has to change later on, how will name change approvals occur? Will it trigger an opportunity for you as the rights holder to leave the agreement, etc.? These are things that you want to discuss with your lawyer and make sure are clearly defined in the contract. Where signage will be displayed is important to really understand and outline with your sponsors and in your legal agreements. There are certainly many cases where signage was applied and then the community reacted strongly because they didn't like the signage, or they didn't like the particular brand, or they didn't like how it affected the community. And as a result, the property had to move the signs, and then that triggered a renegotiation of the contract or a reevaluation because that sign was critically important to the sponsor. So it's really important that you talk about where signage will be displayed, how you will maintain it, and what happens if you, as the property or the rights holder, decide to move the signage. Make sure you have this conversation with your sponsors and make sure you have it with your legal team so that you outline it in a way in the contract that provides you maximum protection. And then, of course, you're going to want to talk about what promotional benefit the sponsor should expect. It's rare that a naming rights sponsorship is nothing more than name on building. There's usually some hospitality, some pouring rights, some product placement, VIP executive suites. There will almost certainly be other promotional benefits that the sponsor expects or that you want to sell them. You're going to want to make sure you get really clear with your sponsor about what that is, make sure you do a proper valuation, and then include this in your agreement with them. I feel like this goes without saying, but you'd be surprised. Full payment terms. Are they paying you all up front? Are they paying you a percentage up front and then dripping the rest out evenly over X years? Are you going to have to meet certain performance criteria? Get clear on the payment terms. Talk to a sponsorship professional to make sure you're doing something that's supported by industry standard, and speak to your lawyer about the risks of whatever payment terms you decide. And make sure it's clearly outlined when you're going to invoice, what are the penalties of non-payment, etc. Now, at the beginning of all sponsorship relationships, we think everything's going to go perfectly. And so we don't even want to think about termination or what would happen at the end of the agreement, or if either party has to terminate the agreement early. You want to get clear on what those penalties would be. What are the sort of things that would trigger the termination of the agreement? And make sure that this is covered in your agreement and by your legal team. If you wait until the relationship dissolves or something awful happens and it's not clearly outlined in your agreement, believe me, you will wish that you had included this and pre-negotiated it before you got to the point of the relationship breaking down. So you want to do business with people you know, like, trust, respect. You both want the same things, but you should also always have a contract when it comes to these types of agreements. I would love it if you could drop down below your biggest takeaway from this video, the thing that stood out most to you, or if you've been through some of these negotiations, what are some of those things that you ended up putting in the contract that you didn't think you would, or that surprised you that you had to include in a contract? And of course, remember, this is not legal advice, and this is certainly not representative of a complete contract. These are just some of the things that you're going to want to think about. And think of this more as a cue for conversations to have with a lawyer who is skilled in these types of negotiations and these types of contracts. And remember, the sponsorship proposal does not make the sale. You do. Good luck out there.